Before 1952, my people used to roam this country freely. They hunted, trapped, fished. They were free people to do whatever they wanted.
Colonizing nations around the world have rarely understood the connection that First Nations people have to the land.
I'd like to move back here in the future and have kids of my own.
Perhaps that is why 130 different Indigenous communities in Canada alone have been relocated from their traditional territories.
The flood shouldn't have been here. People been chased out. Wish they could come back.
When a transnational corporation floods the ancestral lands of an Aboriginal nation, there is little thought given to the effect it might have on those people, or the effect that the destruction of their land might have on their traditional way of life. And there certainly isn't any thought given to what humanity is losing in the process.
The one thing that struck me about the Cheslatta story was that your drum was taken away. Every person on this earth is entitled to music.
The year 1952 was to be like any other year for the Cheslattuten. They would fish for char, whitefish, trout, and kokanee on Cheslatta Lake. They would trap for beaver. They would hunt for caribou, deer, or moose. Families would plant and harvest their gardens and take care of their horses and cattle. There would be feasting, dancing, and drumming. But in April of 1952, all of it would end.
I remember just about everything what happened to my people here. We're almost like we're under arrest.
We didn't even know what they're going to do to us.
I just passed 12 and then they chased us out of here.
He told me you're going to flood this Alcan and you people got to move. They had a meeting. On the way back, I realized that it was of a lot of consequence because of the way I heard my mother crying.
John Casimel's mother was crying because her people had been told by outsiders to leave Cheslatta Lake, and the only way of life they had ever known. It was quite simple, really. The villages of the Cheslattuten, located on the shores of Cheslatta and Murray Lakes for centuries, were in the way. Economic development far outweighed the sentimental attachment a few Indians had to some land. They had to go. Progress was at hand.
This is the interior of British Columbia. It's a rugged land, remote. It's a rich land of minerals, fertile valleys, of powerful pounding rivers, breeding ground for the great Pacific salmon. It's a land of immense forests, but where once in somber isolation dwelt only the Indian and the totem thunderbird, today there is change. And with expanding industry, the need is for power. The rivers, lakes, and mountain torrents of British Columbia could produce a total of 10 million horsepower.
Enter Alcan, the aluminum company of Canada. Already well established in the province of Quebec, with numerous smelting plants along the Saguenay River, Alcan was a favorite with the federal government because of its contributions to the Second World War. The company had supplied nearly a third of the aluminum needed to build the aircrafts which helped to defeat the Nazis in Germany. After the war, the aluminum market was booming. So by 1948, the company was looking at expansion, this time in British Columbia, and the BC government welcomed them with open arms.
The mentality of the times was to open up the Northlands, and, prosperity, development was such a good word, and any kind of mega project was looked at as the domination of man over nature in the context of this being a very good thing. So both levels of government have actively supported Alcan's development in northern British Columbia and have granted them water licenses that in 1990s would never be tolerated by the general population.
The production of aluminum takes cheap power in continuous and enormous quantities. The upper Nechako River watershed, with all of the lakes and streams that ran into it, was perfect for a company like Alcan. Eager to promote economic development, the provincial government granted Alcan exclusive rights to the Nechako watershed, all 5,500 square miles of it, as well as the rights to the Nanaka watershed, which would be used to expand its operations in later years. Its control of these watersheds would last until the year 1999.
Every drop of water that runs off my roof belongs to Alcan. They got a piece of paper that says that. If I want to get a water license to irrigate my hay meadows, I got to go to Alcan. I don't go to the federal government or the provincial government. They won't give it to me because Alcan's got all the water.
Because Alcan was going to be contributing so much money to British Columbia, it wanted some breaks. So the provincial government created the Industrial Development Act in 1949. Through the act, Alcan had maximum company control of the resources with minimum taxation and regulation. It excluded Alcan from the general legislation and administrative law of the province. The cost to the British Columbia taxpayer for the completion of the project was $50 million.
The last time Alcan declared a quarterly profit was, I believe, 1992, and at the end of 1992, according to the Globe and Mail's info search, the company owed $995 million in deferred taxes. So they've been getting a free ride from the government for years.
So in 1950, legal agreement in hand, Alcan began to transform the British Columbia landscape. For starters, the Nechako River was flowing the wrong way. The head streams of the Nechako tumbled out of the mountains and swept inland through sprawling lakes, then into the Nechako and down the mighty Fraser. 500 miles southward at Vancouver, the Nechako waters finally found the sea. To prevent this waste of water power, Alcan built the Kenny Dam, reversing the flow of the entire watershed. Construction on the dam began in 1950. On October 8, 1952, they shut off the water to the Nechako and stopped the river dead. The dam had been built without any outlet to release water, so during the 4 years that it took for the reservoir to fill, most of the upper Nechako was dry. Salmon were wiped out downstream.
We were kids and we thought it was great fun because we could run back and forth across the river, just wading and splashing, and there were deep pools with fish trapped in them, dying everywhere.
Although the water license granted to Alcan had no fish protection measures, the Department of Fisheries asked Alcan to put some water back into the Nechako during the spring and summer months for the spawning Chinook and migrating sockeye. Alcan's response was another temporary and inexpensive dam on the Murray-Cheslatta system, but it did not have anywhere near the amount of water needed to sustain the fish populations, and they died anyway. Construction on the Coffer Dam began on March 28, and it finished on April 8, 1952. Alcan employees and officials from the Department of Indian Affairs made their first visit to Cheslatta Lake on April 3. There they announced that there would be a meeting to surrender their lands on April 16. News of the meeting traveled fast and was met with fear and confusion.
So I asked my dad, where would we go if they test us out? I don't want to go from here. He didn't even know where we're going to go. And then he said to me, there must be kittens. They can't test us off our place.
Pat Edmund was 12 years old when his future was snatched away from him. His family lived on what is now known as Reserve Number 9 on the western end of Cheslatta Lake. When they heard about the meeting, they traveled to Reserve Number 5. Alcan's helicopter arrived 5 days late on Sunday, April 20, 1952.
They told us that are we gonna say yes or no about if we want to move, you know?
Reserve Number 5 was Abel Peters' home. Because he had served in the Second World War, Abel acted as an interpreter for his people, who were extremely upset that they were being forced to move at such short notice. The only pens or pencils allowed in the meeting were the ones the people were to use for signing the official surrender documents, which were presented almost immediately. Marvin Charlie, now the chief of the Cheslatta, was born on Reserve Number 5. He remembers being told some horrible news and not being able to sleep the whole night. He was 8 years old.
My dad told us that we had to move away. And what question come to my mind was that I asked my father, I said, when are we coming home? And he looked down a long time, very sad, almost in tears, and he said, we're never going to come back. When we leave here, we're never going to come back.
From where Alcan and the government officials were standing, Sunday evening's meeting was not a success. It turned out the Indians had some demands of their own, namely new land and buildings purchased before they moved, a monthly pension paid to each person for life, compensation for their trap lines, and new roads to be built to the reserves that were not to be surrendered. The Department of Indian Affairs official called these demands fantastic and unreasonable, definitely out of the question.
DIA is supposed to be on our side, but he was against us all the way.
In fact, DIA